The moment of return from deployment is often imagined as a reunion filled with relief, gratitude, and warmth. For the protagonist, every sleepless night spent in a war zone was endured with the thought of coming back to the person he loved, and the home he believed was still waiting unchanged. He had carried the weight of sacrifice, protecting his nation while suppressing personal pain, counting the days until he could finally hold his family again. In the battlefield, he fought with courage, but it was the emotional love for his wife and daughter that kept his spirit alive. His letters were full of longing and promises, imagining her reading them with the same affection. He replayed scenarios of walking through the door, being welcomed with tears of joy and embraces, the symbol of his struggle being worthwhile. But when he stepped inside his home, the reality he met was devastating, his dream shattered with a single stroke of betrayal. Instead of the loving embrace he anticipated, he walked in on a scene no loyal husband would ever be prepared for. The woman he trusted, to whom he had dedicated years of faithfulness, was not waiting for him but was instead involved with another man. The shock was more violent than any combat attack he had experienced. In war, he was trained to expect the unexpected, but inside his home, betrayal pierced deeper than any bullet. Emotional pain does not come with warning, and witnessing infidelity after years of separation instantly tore apart the very foundation of his hopes. It was not just his wife's unfaithfulness, but the crushing realization that the love he preserved during hard nights had not been reciprocated. The home was no longer a place of solace, but a battlefield of heartbreak. What makes this moment incredibly intense is the contrast between his emotional state and what he had imagined. He returned believing he would be stepping into peace, but instead he stepped into chaos. The silence of a betrayed heart is far louder than the gunfire he once escaped. The sudden confrontation with infidelity transformed his long-awaited return into a moment of deep emotional collapse. He had given his emotional loyalty despite physical absence, but while he was surviving war, his marriage was dying. This realization triggered internal conflict, a mixture of grief, disbelief, anger, and humiliation. He was not just a wronged husband. He was a soldier whose sacrifice was dishonored by those he trusted most. Furthermore, this experience introduced a feeling of spiritual betrayal. He had fought wars for duty, but he always believed that his home would be his reward. Yet, what he found was that while he was protecting the nation, someone else was destroying his family. This instant emotional transition from hopeful return to ruined expectations marks a powerful turning point in the narrative. It is not simply about infidelity, but about emotional theft, the robbing of his dream and annihilation of his trust. In that moment, his heart did not just break, it became weaponized. The sight of his wife's lover raising a hand against his daughter became the very moment his world stopped, and everything he thought he could control within himself collapsed. A betrayal by a spouse is painful, but seeing someone harm the child he had fought so hard to come back to awakened a rage deeper than any injury war could inflict. As a soldier, he had endured hunger, fear, and uncertainty, but all those challenges were willingly accepted because he believed he was protecting the innocent, including his own family. Watching his daughter, the embodiment of all his love and sacrifices, being physically abused wasn't just an act of domestic violence. It was an unforgivable violation of fatherhood, trust, and humanity. The daughter, innocent and fragile, had endured this cruelty silently, perhaps in fear or confusion, unsure whether her father would ever come home to protect her again. That realization added unbearable agony to his heart. The man she should have feared was living inside their home, not on the other side of the battlefield. His absence had unintentionally left her unprotected, and his wife's recklessness had allowed a predator entry into the child's life. In military terms, he understood aggressors and defenders. In that moment, his instincts shifted from being a returned soldier to becoming a shield for his child. His sense of duty transformed not towards a nation this time, but towards the small, terrified figure he saw before him. All the discipline, restraint, and emotional control he had mastered in war gave way to something primal, the instinct of a father defending his blood. His mind flashed through every moment he thought about her while away. The nights he counted her birthdays, imagined her first words, thought about her starting school. Every sacrifice he made was for her safety, and now, witnessing that safety being brutally violated, the dam inside him broke. What fueled his rage even more was that this tormentor was allowed access by his own wife, the person who should have been the primary protector in his absence. The betrayal multiplied first as a spouse, then as a mother. The child's suffering became proof that the infidelity was more than emotional failure. It was an act of complete moral negligence. The man who harmed her wasn't just an outsider. He was someone welcomed into the home he worked tirelessly to return to. Every bruise on his daughter felt like a strike on his own heart. Her silent plea triggered a psychological shift. He was no longer reacting to betrayal, he was responding to threat. At that moment, all boundaries dissolved, and his emotional pain channeled into violent determination. It was no longer about revenge for his broken marriage, but about justice for his child. War had taught him when to fight and when to defend. In that room, he didn't see a lover, he saw an enemy, and unlike war, this time his mission was personal. This wasn't combat. It was protection. And for a father, nothing matters more than shielding his child from harm, even if it means destroying the source of that pain completely. Trust is the foundation on which any family is built, and when that trust collapses, the emotional destruction can be more devastating than any physical injury. For the deployed soldier, his home was the only mental refuge he had during war. In battle, he endured hardship with the reassuring belief that what he loved remained safe and loyal. But the moment he discovered betrayal, that belief shattered instantly, and along with it, his internal moral compass. He had fought external enemies with discipline, believing that his emotional strength came from a secure and loyal home. Yet what he returned to was the harsh truth that the emotional sanctuary he had relied upon was an illusion. Realizing that the person he trusted most had secretly dismantled the family he fought to protect, created an overwhelming emotional rupture. The betrayal was not only in actions but in deeply rooted intentions. The wife had allowed their emotional foundation to crumble while he was risking his life. The moral boundaries that once guided his actions began to blur. In war, right and wrong are dictated by duty, rules, and survival. At home, he believed right was protecting family, and wrong was abandoning them. Yet, in his absence, his wife had not just abandoned her commitment, but actively poisoned the household with her choices. Every memory of affection suddenly felt counterfeit. The realization that while he was fighting to stay alive, she was living a life of secrecy with another man made him feel foolish, humiliated, and emotionally violated. In that moment, love turned into resentment, devotion into regret. He questioned his sacrifices, wondering if they were ever truly valued. His mental state began to spiral as he faced a deeply conflicting truth. The person he risked everything to return to had emotionally betrayed him beyond repair. Loyalty and sacrifice lost their meaning, and bitterness replaced purpose. The emotional collapse made him feel displaced not only in his household but within himself. He began to confront uncomfortable thoughts. Had his years of service made him blind to what was happening in his own home? Was his family ever truly his, or had he been living a lie? This collapse of trust also triggered a psychological transformation. The boundaries that kept his anger controlled began to dissolve. In the army, he was trained to control aggression. At that moment, he felt no reason to restrain it. The woman who once symbolized love now represented betrayal. The home he imagined as peaceful now felt like an emotionally booby-trapped arena. His daughter, the only innocent in the situation, became the anchor of his sanity, yet the fact that she suffered while he was away made him carry guilt he shouldn't have had to bear. When someone loses trust at such a fundamental level, they begin to question not only their relationships but their identity. He no longer saw himself as a husband returning home, but as a stranger entering a house filled with deception. The emotional collapse stripped him of stability and transformed his grief into something darker, a brewing storm of anger ready to strike. In that instant, he realized that the war he left behind was nothing compared to the war that now existed within his own walls. His reaction was not calculated nor driven by reason, but erupted from a place within him that had been silently accumulating years of pain, sacrifice, longing, and suppressed fear. The moment he saw the man who had violated his home and harmed his child, something inside him broke loose, an unstoppable release of both rage and despair. He had spent years surviving war by controlling his emotions, learning to detach from personal pain in order to stay focused on his mission. But this was different. This wound went far beyond what any enemy on the battlefield could inflict. In combat, he fought against strangers. Here, he was confronting betrayal caused by the very people he loved. The emotional pressure built over years of separation, longing, and dedication transformed into fury because the purpose of his sacrifice had been completely destroyed. His identity as a protector and father was challenged, forcing him into a state of instinctive retaliation. All the discipline instilled in him as a soldier cracked under the weight of his broken trust. His experiences in war had taught him how to fight, but not how to handle betrayal from those closest to him. When he saw his daughter's fear and realized she had been suffering without him, the guilt of not being there merged with the outrage of seeing someone hurt her. That combination, pain, helplessness, and immediate threat, ignited a fury that no training could restrain. At that moment, every ounce of emotional restraint evaporated. He was no longer acting as a disciplined soldier or rational man, but as a wounded father and betrayed husband. This was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, restoring protection, and punishing the violation of something sacred. His anger was raw, unregulated, and overwhelming. It wasn't a reaction to a single moment of betrayal, but a culmination of sleepless nights, distant memories, unspoken fears, and silent hopes destroyed in an instant. The man didn't just represent infidelity. He symbolized everything that had gone wrong during his absence. Every punch he threw was not only against that individual, but against the pain he was forced to endure, against the lies he unknowingly lived through, and against the helplessness he felt upon realizing his child had suffered. He destroyed them not only physically, but emotionally and symbolically. In that moment, destruction was not simply retaliation, but an attempt to erase the ugliness that had infected his once sacred home. His overwhelming emotional eruption also reflects the deeper struggle of someone who has been trained to fight externally, but is left unprepared to handle internal heartbreak. This wasn't a battle of strategy. This was a battle of soul and instinct. While war requires courage, returning home demands vulnerability, and vulnerability is what got shattered. In breaking them, he was attempting to reclaim control, power, and meaning after everything was stripped from him. Yet even in the aftermath of destruction, what he truly sought was not revenge, but the safety and peace that had been stolen from his family. In that moment of uncontrolled reaction, he wasn't just fighting back, He was trying to heal something inside him that war had damaged and betrayal had finally broken. The aftermath of such an emotional and physical eruption does not end with the confrontation. It lingers in every breath that follows. Once the dust settles, what remains is the heavy weight of consequences. The destruction he inflicted may have protected his daughter and punished the wrongdoing, but it also set in motion a series of outcomes that would define his future. His actions, though born of love and anguish, could potentially lead to legal repercussions, custody battles, societal judgment, and psychological trauma that is far more complex than physical wounds. Yet, beneath all of this, his intention was never malicious. It was an instinctive effort to restore safety, dignity, and justice. As a father, and as a man whose honor had been violated, he acted from a place where reason no longer guided him, only raw human instinct. However, every decision has a ripple effect, and now he must face the consequences of allowing emotion to overtake restraint. The home once dreamt of as a place of reunion has now become a battleground of legal and emotional battles. The breakdown of the marriage is inevitable, trust is beyond restoration, and emotional stability will need rebuilding. His wife's betrayal has not only ended their relationship, but has left a permanent scar that may alter his perspective on love and loyalty forever. More importantly, he is left to address his daughter's healing. She is the central figure in his life and the primary reason behind his actions, but now she too requires emotional support and reassurance that the chaos is over. The event, although traumatic, may serve as a turning point, a point where he redirects his life not as a broken husband, but as a devoted father ready to rebuild and protect. With honor violated and trust shattered, part of his journey now lies in overcoming guilt and learning that his response, though violent, came from love. He must deal with the internal conflict, one part of him that believes he did what was necessary, and another part that questions if there was a better way. Society may judge his actions, but his deeper fear is whether his daughter will someday view him as the hero who protected her or the man who lost control. This emotional burden becomes his new battlefield, and unlike war, there are no clear rules or commands to follow. Decisions about future custody, living arrangements, and emotional care must be made carefully, with the understanding that true healing takes time. Yet, despite all the chaos, one undeniable truth emerges: he acted because his child was in danger, and that instinct is the purest form of love. His story becomes not just one of betrayal and destruction, but of a father reclaiming his purpose in the face of unbearable loss. In the ruins of what once was a family, there lies an opportunity for rebirth. Perhaps legal consequences may come, perhaps he will face emotional isolation. But what matters most is that his daughter is safe and will never again endure that kind of pain. In the end, the story is about a man who reached his breaking point not out of weakness, but because his love for his child was stronger than his pain.